something I believe in my faith. Love, in all its forms, is the most powerful weapon we have. Because love is a form of hope, and like hope, love abides. And now, you're committing to it. Which makes you, right now, the two strongest people on this planet. Maybe in this universe.
As of now, Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor is far from my favorite incarnation of the character, but I really enjoy her, and as the one commanding the ship, I think both the character and the actress do a pretty fantastic job. 13 is a curious mind, always thinking and encouraging her companions to think in terms of right and wrong questions to ask about a given situation. She has a sort of frenzied body language that's distinct from Tennant or Smith. She's manic like those two were, but delivers it differently. Less desperate or childlike and more equal parts frustrated and excited. I know a lot of fans felt like they were missing a quote-unquote darker moment from the Doctor this series. And while I agree there's a slight sense of authority missing from this Doctor, there are those who are eager to see 13 snap into a rage over something, or let the generally positive, forgiving attitude slip to reveal the same emotional volatility that 9, 10, 11, and 12 could display. Personally, I can't relate, and I'll tell you why. For as much as I appreciate the Doctor as a constant, a sort of fixed figure who you can always count on to be the Doctor in any circumstance, I also like to read them as a character who grows and develops both within and across different incarnations. And taken on those terms, I personally view 13 as a Doctor emotionally matured beyond her predecessors. Much like Chibnall's series is a dramatic shift from Moffat and Russell's commonalities, 13 herself is the Doctor firmly in a new stage of life, unburdened by a lot of the issues plaguing them in the show's previous 13 years. This is a Doctor now firmly over the trauma of the Time War, one free of 9's survivor's guilt, 10's ego, 11's god complex, and 12's angst over whether or not they're a good man. 13 is a Doctor operating from a place of nothing but positivity and enthusiasm, and while I'd love to see that challenged in the future, in terms of laying a groundwork, Series 11 gives us a Doctor who not only embodies her immediate predecessor's final words,
"Laugh hard, run fast, be kind,"
but also the vision of the character that Chibnall expressed in The Power of Three. A Doctor who runs to things instead of from them, whose mission statement is rooted in a place of inherent positivity and eagerness. 13 not only continues the pattern of Doctors contrasting their predecessors, but she's the perfect realization of 12's final sentiment. It's almost weird how unendingly upbeat and kind she is. Almost. Even the most positive and childlike of previous Doctors could have moments of grumpiness when they really felt like old men. 13's switch is always flipped to enthusiasm, and I can see how that might bug some people. Every Doctor since the show's beginnings has had elements of bullheadedness, pride, vanity, and ego, and 13 just doesn't. Or at least not remotely approaching the same degree. She's far more humble and sweet than most Doctors ever get, and in that way, this is the hardest a Doctor's personality has ever deviated from the standard. I agree with Dan and Chris of the Nothing But Static podcast on one level, check those guys out if you haven't by the way. I was really intrigued with the idea of 13 as an inventor or gadget maker or hands-on engineering whiz in a way that's more pronounced than other Doctors, but it only really ends up playing into her first episode. She does whip up a neat analog device out of some unorthodox materials in Demons of the Punjab and Resolution, but we don't actually get to see her piece it together on screen. Out of all of Series 11, I'd call it Takes You Away the Doctor's best character showcase. We get to see her equal parts scared and excited as she pieces together the existence of a fairy tale from her childhood. We see her perform what she thinks is the ultimate sacrifice to save one small, broken family. We see her empathize and connect with the closest thing the story has to an antagonist, feel its pain, and offer it a consolation before she's forced to leave it by its lonesome forever. This Doctor also shares 10's staunch no guns or weapons policy, and I gotta admit that's never been my favorite character trait for the Doctor to have. Don't get me wrong, I think only the most dire of circumstances should prompt the Doctor to shoot someone in cold blood, but having them so adamantly against firearms as a principle, especially when they're being used against non-sentient beings, is just kind of irritating. I know it really bothered me on my first couple of viewings of the Ghost Monument, before I started to kind of interpret her dialogue in that scene differently. Taking it less as her opposing Ryan going out to shoot up the robots because she's just against shooting things, and more her doing it because she knows that's just not the smart option in this situation and is potentially only putting Ryan himself in danger, when they do have other materials to work with. Where it gets iffier and just straight out weird is in the Battle of Rhaenskor Kolos, where she says things like, "My rules change all the time," or that her no-weapons policy is flexible. That kinda recontextualizes a lot, and I'm not really sure what Chibnall is trying to say with the character there, or whether or not this kind of hypocrisy is meant to be unique to 13. If that's expanded on in future stories, then alright, but right now my stance on it is much the same as it was for the 10th, which is that I really just hope it's dropped, or at the very least underplayed. On an aesthetic note, the 13th Doctor's costume was one I bristled against pretty hard in the lead-up to Series 11, but it thankfully never bothered me in the actual show. Like the character herself, the costume is probably the biggest deviation from the qualities that many tend to associate with a doctorly outfit, aside from 9 or the War Doctor. You can tell a lot about 13's personality from this getup. Even at their most ratty or bohemian or, colorful, most Doctor's outfits conveyed a sense of upper-class trappings, whereas 13 is definitely more geek chic, befitting the more casual, less self-righteous way that she carries herself. It's a simple enough ensemble, and the straightforward nature of it, plus the colorful palette and heavy boots, give the impression of someone who's out to explore and have fun first and foremost. I'm not sure I'll ever be used to the Doctor with pants that expose the ankle, though. If I had to sum up what I feel people are missing, it's that Series 11 isn't a string of episodes that really puts its Doctor through any kind of emotional or physical gauntlet. And while I'd like to see that change and to see this Doctor's boundaries get tested in the future, I'm perfectly fine accepting them as sort of a rock for all of the other emotional goings-on in the stories. Like I said, they're the constant, what is it?
Space Gandalf.
Space Gandalf, right, yeah, see that works. The supporting protagonist who drives events forward and always has an important impact and input on the situation, but who isn't necessarily asked to grow or change. That's left to the others. If there's one thing I can say for the TARDIS team that I feel justifies there being 3 of them, it's that they're not interchangeable. Yaz is the go-getter, the natural leader, Graham is the pathos, and Ryan is a complex beast. He grows the most over the course of the series, getting past a lot of insecurities. He's a quirky dork who likes to compliment himself out loud, make impromptu shadow puppets, etc., but he's also a kid whose sense of hurt and abandonment comes through in a prickly, almost pessimistic disposition. In Resolution, we learn that his dad's abandonment made Ryan believe that he wasn't deserving of his love, maybe deserving of love, period, and beyond just being really sad, that puts a few things in perspective, like just how eager he is to avoid facing or even talking about his dyspraxia at the top of the series, before he gets more open about discussing it later and by the end of Resolution is even able to make light of it. There's also the way that he seems to believe in Saranga conundrum that he couldn't be a father even if he wanted to, and on a way smaller note, the kind of defensive attitude he shows when he proves not to have all the book smarts in the world, touch something he shouldn't, or otherwise has something he does backfire in his face. I get the sense that Ryan really doesn't see many reasons to think highly of himself, and doesn't like it when people touch on the areas he thinks he's weak in, before all of his adventures with the Doctor give him the chance to prove himself capable and brave, if a bit impulsive. Graham is the one singular thing about Series 11 that I dare say people like pretty universally, and it's easy to see why. Despite being so thoroughly consumed by grief and clearly being the one of the cast with the least proclivity toward proactively facing danger, Graham always manages to be an incredibly empathetic, funny guy. He's appealing in the same way characters like Rory or Wilfred are, in that he's the most normal guy who feels like someone you could just go out and meet on the street, juxtaposed against these out-there settings and the Doctor's own big personality. Graham is very down-to-earth, and though he takes the weirdness around him in stride, well, relative stride anyway, he's also the quickest to voice some kind of complaint or desire to maybe cut down just a bit on the deadly danger and risk-taking. He shows a fatherly instinct not just with Ryan, but with other characters like Yaz or Charlie. In Ghost Monument, we learn that Graham copes with Grace's absence by asking what she'd say in a given situation, and I love that after that's established, it keeps popping up as a coping mechanism. Graham will constantly try to voice what Grace would say or want throughout the series, and one of the few things that really works about the Battle of Ranskor-Kalos is how believable it is that Graham would pull the same putting words in Grace's mouth habit to justify proactively eliminating Tim Shaw. The way that Graham sticks by and believes in Ryan even when Ryan doesn't believe in himself also makes him plenty endearing, and makes it a good thing that their dynamic is the running crux of the series, as it serves well as a beating heart for the dynamic as a whole. Yaz is the Doctor's mirror image and designated right-hand woman. She's the one of the trio who almost never fails to be on 13's same wavelength. I think most people, myself included, might have slightly oversold just how shafted Yaz's character was this series. Now, she absolutely was shafted when compared with Ryan and Graham, who had fully fleshed out character arcs spanning multiple episodes. But with maybe 2 exceptions, Yaz does at least get a couple of good moments to herself per story, and I'm glad to have her in the show. I think it hurts her character to view the show weekly, having each subsequent week but one let down any expectations that this one will be the Yaz episode for sure. As early as Ghost Monument, she's the one who implicitly trusts the Doctor the most. While Ryan is initially a tad cynical and wary of the Doctor's capabilities, and Graham pragmatically follows her lead because they have no other option, Yaz is already fully on board with her as a figure to put her faith in. This dynamic of the 3 companions as dismissive, pragmatic, and proactive respectively pops up again from time to time, like the beginning of Kerblam where Yaz jumps at the call to help someone while Ryan is quick to assume it's a gag and Graham takes a middle ground, can't hurt to check approach. I made note of this earlier, but Yaz's status as an up-and-coming police officer is, pardon the pun, criminally underutilized. The idea posed in Rosa that Yaz isn't where she wants to be and where she wants to be is in charge is potentially really interesting, but nothing is done with it. You could maybe make the inference that Yaz's aspirations to do and be more than she is being contrasted with her very typical, unspectacular home life, but that's never said or explored in any detail. There's a lot of potential in this character that's going unexplored, to the point that in Resolution she's outright superfluous. If I were in charge of Series 12, I'd be certain to compensate, but that's for another video. As a total package, I really like the dynamic we have with these 4 characters. There's much more potential to be realized with the fam, and... oh god, I'm not calling them that. I think it's about time that we wrap this up.